Hello and welcome back. Well, today's video, I'm going to be changing gears yet again. And for this video, we'll be talking about a box camera, specifically this Kodak Brownie Target 620. Now, this camera was first introduced in 1946 and was the successor to the Kodak Target Brownie 620. A slightly different camera, but obviously based on basically the same principles. Now, Kodak had been making box cameras like this since the 1800s, so by the time this was introduced in 1946, the box camera was coming to the end of its useful life. This was one of the last, I believe, that Kodak made in the traditional box camera style. So this camera was made until about 1952. Now, the Brownie Target 620, as the name suggests, takes 620 film. And for those who aren't familiar with 620, it's the same size as 120, has the same frame spacing, but it's on a slightly narrower spool. So a camera that takes 620 film typically cannot take 120 film. Now, I received this camera as part of a package deal in a camera lot that I recently bought. I wasn't necessarily looking for this camera specifically. There was another camera in the lot that I was interested in, but this one came along with it. It's in really good condition. It looks hardly used. But what's interesting is when I went to open this camera to put new film in, the way you open it is first pull out the winding knob so that its mechanism gets out of the way, and then you pull up on this knob here, which releases the whole front of the camera. It slides out, as you can see. So there's the internal mechanism. Now, what's interesting here is when I went to look at the inside the camera, look at that. There's an old roll of film already in there. This happens every once in a while. I will buy an old camera, typically a camera that's like a folding camera or a box camera, and when I go to open it, lo and behold, there's film inside. So I'm looking forward to getting this film out of there, and I'll try and develop it and see what's on there. I find typically what happens in these scenarios is, as I look through the old pictures, it's pretty clear. Most of the time they were taken in the late 50s and early 60s. And I'm assuming what happens is these cameras were becoming obsolete around that time, and somebody loaded film, took some pictures, and then the family moved on to other cameras and they forgot that the film was in there. This is probably the maybe 8th or 10th time that this has happened, and every time before I've found interesting photos. Now, it's always a strange feeling when you develop somebody else's pictures from 60 or 70 years ago, and you know you're the first person that's ever seen them. So the photos have never been seen either by the subjects of the photos or the photographers themselves. Now, the Kodak Brownie Target 620 has typical controls for a box camera of this era and before. It's a little bit fancier in that it has two viewfinders, the standard viewfinder that you look from above for portrait orientation, and then you can also turn the camera into landscape orientation, and it has a separate viewfinder there. This one actually has two different apertures, which is unusual, and also unusual is the way that you actuate those apertures. So there's just a little bent hook, if you will, right here that sticks out of the camera. You pull that out to get to a different aperture. The camera also does both instantaneous and time shutter, which was not uncommon. And just like the aperture, the control for that is a little bent hook, unmarked. If you leave it in, like I'm showing here, it is in instant mode. And if you pull that out like that, then you're in time mode. So pretty basic. Now, 620 film obviously hasn't been produced since the 1990s. There are some companies that are re-rolling 120 film onto 620 spools. Film Photography Project is one. I think there's a couple others out there. The other option is to shoot original 620 film, obviously expired by this point, but you can find it if you look for it. I'm actually going to be shooting this Kodak Gold color film, which is not something I've shot a lot of, certainly not in 620. This particular roll expired in 1996, which was right towards the end of when this film was produced. And we'll see how that performs in the old box camera. Okay, we're going to load the Brownie Target 620 with this roll of Kodacolor Gold, Kodak Gold 200 that expired in 1996. And I've already obviously taken the back off of the camera, and I've taken the empty spool out of its position. So I'll go ahead and put that in position as the take-up spool, which is here. These reels are just held in by friction. Pretty basic. So just push that in until it clicks into place. And then I'll open up the Kodak Gold. This is new old stock film, as you've seen me use in the past. Expired in 1996. And you can see it's a 620 film, something that Kodak no longer makes, or at least they no longer package as 620. Like I said earlier, 620 film is essentially the same size as 120 film. The width is the same, and all of the frame markings are in the same position. The only difference is that the spool is quite a bit narrower. Ostensibly, Kodak originally introduced 620 film, I believe back in the 1920s, as in their words, a way to make smaller cameras, although I think most everyone recognizes now that they were intending to basically try and corner the market on a new type of film, so that if you bought a Kodak camera, you would have to buy Kodak film. So here we go, Kodak Gold 200. I'm actually pretty excited about this. This is not something I shoot with very often. So if you've ever loaded a box camera before, you know it's just about as basic as it gets. The only trick really is to make sure you don't let the film unspool while you're loading it. And in this camera in particular, like I just said, the spools are held in place by friction. You don't even have to pull any knobs out or get anything open to get the film in there. So the film's in place. Now what I want to do is hold the flanges while I've got tension on the leader and try and maintain that tension. Bring the leader around, and in the take-up spool, I want the wide slot facing forward. There's a wide slot and a narrow slot. I'm going to push the leader tab through that slot. I'm going to pull that back out. I'm going to get the turns in place before I put the reel in, just so I can make sure it's centered and connecting properly. With a couple of turns in place, drop that back down in, just like that. It's kind of holding itself in place at this point because of the tension of the springs, so I'm going to let go of this one, and then before it has a chance to unravel itself, I'll go ahead and reassemble the camera, and then pulling up on the latch that holds it together. And then lastly, the winding knob turns counterclockwise. I'm going to drop it in until I feel it click into the spool. And then on the back here, you can see the red window is where the number 1 is going to show up. So I'm just going to turn that until I see the number 1. Okay, now there's an arrow, so I can verify that the leader is moving. There's another arrow. And shortly after the arrows, I should find, hopefully, looks like some words. Kodak Gold, 200, and there we go, number 1. So there we are, ready to shoot frame number 1, and we'll take it out and take it for a spin now. Okay, so overall the film and old camera combination performed pretty well actually, considering that the film expired almost 30 years ago and the camera is now about 80 years old almost. You can see here there's not a lot of contrast, especially when shooting into the sun, which is to be expected for that camera in particular. This last image here of the Futura definitely was the best exposed of the pictures I took at the car show. And what I realized later was I had left the aperture on the wider aperture for that shot of the Futura. And then I decided that since it was a sunny day and I was shooting 200 speed film that I should use the smaller aperture, and the photos after that were underexposed. So I have a couple more rolls of that film, and I'm going to need to rate it more like 100 or possibly even 50, just due to the age of the film. But overall, it performed pretty well. Now, you might be wondering what happened to the film that was already in the camera. I did develop it, but unfortunately, the results were not that great. You can just barely make out the outline of a house, obviously in a snowy condition. There's a couple photos that came out. So that was a little disappointing, but you never know what you're going to get with old film like that. I've had some film that was much older than this film in a much worse camera, and it came out perfectly developed just like it had been taken yesterday. So it's always a little bit of a gamble. You don't know what you're going to get, but worth the gamble in this case. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will be coming to you with another video soon.